been speculation that the lake could support life, at least microbial life, but where would they get the energy needed to survive? A new study of the lake shows the area where it's located may be seismically active. If that's true, it could also mean there's geothermal heat there. That heat might provide enough energy to support an ecosystem in the same way that geothermal vents support diverse ecosystems at the bottom of the ocean. Finding a way to drill into the lake without contaminating it might give scientists a way to do similar search on Jupiter's icy moon Europa, which is also thought to have liquid water beneath the crust. There's another warning today about the dangers of global warming. The latest set of predictions comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The panel was set up by the UN to forecast what effect global warming will have on the various countries of the world. There's broad agreement among scientists that climate change is happening, but the effect on your life depends strongly on where you live. If you live along the eastern seaboard, or in Florida, for example, you'll likely face rising sea levels coupled with stronger storms and more hurricanes, a recipe for property damage. On the other hand, farmers living in the interior of North America might face more droughts, but they'll also have a longer growing season.
The reality of climate is that it varies from year to year. And with climate change, we're going to experience changes in the frequency and severity of different extremes. So we'll see more droughts, for example, increased heat spells, intense rainfalls, and probably a reduction in severe cold snaps.
Climate change could also cost Africa one of its most beautiful landmarks. The snows of Kilimanjaro stand out atop that mountain peak, but a new study says that snow may disappear within just 15 years. Scientists studying the glaciers atop the mountain say they're receding rapidly. Kilimanjaro has already lost more than 80% of its ice. Looks like another day in space for the crew of the Space Shuttle Atlantis. All the work was on Earth today as mission managers scrambled to see whether or not they could land the shuttle safely in Florida. Atlantis was originally scheduled to land on Sunday, but high winds and low cloud cover kept it in space. The same problems forced a scrub of today's two landing opportunities. The shuttle's in no danger while it's in orbit. It has enough fuel and supplies for at least another day, so they'll try again tomorrow. And finally, a new report says the old adage, "You are what you eat," may be true, because mice who eat a lot of fat end up being fatheads. That's according to researchers in Toronto. They fed a group of mice a high-fat diet. It's known that such a diet's bad for the heart in humans as well as in mice. But the scientists found it's also bad for the brain. After just 3 months of this high-fat diet, the mice weren't as smart as they had been, taking significantly longer to learn tasks like negotiating a maze. However, when the mice were given a shot of glucose, the sugar used as fuel in the brain, they improved rapidly. These findings seem to support the idea that a high-fat diet can impair the way the brain uses glucose, making it harder for the brain to do its job.
Coming up a little later on the show tonight, finding a safe and quiet neighborhood to raise kids. Why penguins enjoy a relatively carefree existence in Antarctica. And next, coping with stress the primitive way. Why baboons and humans share similar worries in their day-to-day lives. Places. Now, that's not because the scientists are on strike. That's because most of them are at the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science's annual conference. It's taking place in San Francisco, California. The prestigious event attracts thousands of people from every aspect of the science world to meet and to discuss the latest in everything from space to stem cells. And our Washington correspondent, Patty Kim, has been there since it began, keeping an eye on all the scientific comings and goings for us.
Hi, Patty.
Hey, Jay.
How are you?
I'm good.
And how has the AAAS been treating you? What sort of big stories have you come across?
Well, Jay, probably the biggest story is the fact that humans have a lot to learn from baboons. Now, it turns out that baboon societies really echo a lot of what goes on in human society. So by studying baboon societies, what we're really doing is holding up a mirror to ourselves, and as well the phenomenon of stress and the kind of health effects it can have on us, such as hardening of arteries, high blood pressure, all that sort of thing. And by learning how it works in baboon societies, we'll maybe be able to see how it works in our society and perhaps get around the problem of stress, or at least soften some of those negative effects.
So, you know, at first blush, it would seem that baboon society and human society are pretty far removed from each other. Who's been doing this research?
Well, a Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who is a neurobiologist from Stanford University here in California, he's been taking a look at baboons in Kenya, and he's been studying them for the past 20 years now. And specifically what he's looking at is the direct link between a baboon's rank and personality and the kind of stress levels that that baboon might be facing, and also obviously the kind of negative health effects that that stress level is causing in the baboon. And he's doing this work primarily in the Serengeti, which is absolutely perfect for what he's trying to do because there's plenty of food, there are big bands of baboons, there's not a lot of predators to speak of, and so these baboons end up spending, what, maybe 3 hours a day foraging for food, looking for food, and the rest of the 9 hours of day, or daylight, they just get on each other's nerves. So there's a lot of...
Well, there is a parallel to human society.
Exactly. This is my point. So the bottom line, Sapolsky is saying, is there's a lot of interaction among baboons, just like there is in human groups and human society, and a lot of the stress develops out of these interactions.
So could you give us an example of the sort of thing he's seen?
Well, apparently it ain't easy being a baboon in the Serengeti. Some classic examples of the kind of stress, well, if you were a lower-ranking baboon, say, you might have just spent hours cleaning off a bit of root, you know, to have for lunch, and some bigger guy can come along and steal that right from underneath you. As well, you might have just chatted up a female baboon friend for a while, hoping that the baboon friend would maybe groom you, but then somebody would come along and break up that little conversation. And as well, there's just the baboon bully who'll come and pick on you for no apparent reason at all.
So is it always bad being a lower-ranking baboon? I mean, do the higher-ranked individuals stress out as well?
Yeah, you're not doing yourself any favors if you're a higher-ranking baboon either. The dominant, quote-unquote, type A personality baboon, the hard-driven, competitive, aggressive type, because they're facing very, very high stress levels as well. It turns out Sapolsky has found that they're really feeling quite a bit of stress as they're going about competing.
So I can understand where Sapolsky can see these interactions happening and squabbles and everything else, but how does he know that it really is stressing them in a sort of physical sense?
Well, that's exactly it. He has to collect blood samples. So what he does is he anesthetizes these baboons from a distance with a blow dart. And he takes these samples, and then those samples will reveal the kind of hormone levels that would indicate high stress or low stress, and as well the eventual negative effects that it could have, as I mentioned, the hardening of the arteries, the high blood pressure, and it's the wrong kind of cholesterol that would be in that blood that would cause those negative effects. So that's what he's looking out for.
So, and he finds those in the stressed individuals.
That's right. You can be a lower-ranking one, a high-ranking one, and he's found that you're pretty much looking at pretty high stress levels in both those two kinds of groups.
So what sort of lessons, I mean, as you pointed out, Patty, the Serengeti looks like it's a wonderful, plentiful place to be, and yet the social interactions are causing the stress. What can we learn from that?
Well, I'd say the biggest lesson to take home is that the healthiest baboons, the ones that handle the stress the best, are the ones that actually cultivate friendships with the female baboons. They spend a lot of time hanging around with the females and being groomed by them, and also spending time with their kids. But what's really intriguing is the top dog, so to speak, the top baboon, the dominant baboon of the group, also has life pretty easy. It turns out that they don't have very high stress levels. So the bottom line seems to be you're the least stressed when you're not struggling, or if you don't have to.
Now, Patty, that's the lessons baboons hold for us. Anything else coming out of the AAAS today that intrigues you?
Well, now, Jay, we're going from stress right over to old age, so some very cheery news here. It turns out that the life expectancy rate at birth for humans is not likely to reach 100 years for a long time to come, rather. The chances are slim to nil, according to one scientist, and that scientist is a Dr. Jay Olshansky, who's a public health professor at the University of Chicago in Illinois. And he says that our bodies were just not designed to live that long, and we're really pushing the envelope as it is.
But that's odd, Patty, because recently there's been a lot of talk about, humans might live to 130, 140, 150, and now you're saying Olshansky is saying 100 is the upper limit?
I think the distinction to make here, Jay, is that Olshansky is talking about a naturally built-in lifespan. He's not talking about medical interventions such as gene therapy or cloning or stem cells even. He's just talking about the natural cycle of life. And he loves the analogy of the car. The people who study this field all seem to love this analogy, but they say just like a car, we will just eventually break down as we keep on driving. And unless we figure out a way to actually slow down the rate of aging or change the structure of the body itself, we can just expect that we're not going to hit that 100-year mark anytime soon.
So the only thing we can do, I guess, is sort of push it toward 100. So rather than the average life expectancy being 85 or 86, we might get it into the 90s, but not much further.
Exactly, and he also points out that it's probably only 50 years down the road when people here, at least in the United States, will actually achieve that 100-year life expectancy rate.
Okay, Patty, thanks a lot for the report.
Thanks, Jay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Patty Kim, our Washington correspondent, joined us from San Francisco, where she's been attending the American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting.
The compact disc has been with us for some time now, but lately it's gone through something of a change.
Suddenly, it's possible to record onto them, and that prompted one viewer to wonder what happened. Carl Clements from Toronto asked us,
what changes were made to the CD-ROM that allowed PC users to burn their own CDs?
And here with an answer to Carl's question is Tom Zimmerman. He works for IBM in San Jose, California.
Tom.
Oh, sorry. I was just listening to some music I burned onto the CD. You know, Carl, CDs have changed. We now can program CDs in our home on our PC, but it wasn't always that way. It used to be that CDs were stamped, that the ones and zeros that represent music were actually pressed onto the CD, like this clay on top of the CD. They would put the master on something like this, the bumps representing ones, the flat parts representing zeros, and they'd squish down on it, make an impression. That's great if you have one CD that you want to make 1,000,000 of. But if you want to make it at home, you can't have a machine that's pressing on your CD. What changed is people put a chemical on the CD so the laser that reads it can actually burn ones and zeros right in your PC. Let's look and see how a CD that you can write works. Don't do this at home, but if you see there's on top of this reflecting aluminum. Then there's this green colored dye and then some plastic on the bottom. The magic of writable CDs is that green colored dye. It's pretty clear, so the laser light can pass through, reflect off the aluminum, and down to the reader. That's a 1. But when you crank up the laser power about 10 times, it heats up that chemical to about 300 degrees Celsius. And that makes it cloudy. And that stops the laser from reflecting. And that's how they burn a 0. So by turning that laser on and off at high power, you can write ones and zeros onto the disk and then play it in a machine like this.
Any burning issues you'd like us to find an answer to? Here's how you write them to us.
When we come back, why this neighborhood's unpopularity is the very thing that attracted so many penguins to it. The coldest place on Earth and the animals that thrive there. Next.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Jane Gilbert.
And I'm Jay Ingram. In just a moment, Brian Keating will take us to Antarctica to show us why a frozen sheet of ice is such an attractive home for a penguin.
Also coming up in this half hour, the nemesis of nematodes, how some worms are being eaten alive by a slow-moving predator. And separating fact from fiction on the archaeological field. 2 stories about the origins of an artifact vie for your vote.
But first, an unpopular neighborhood that's a big hit with the locals. Here's Animal Talk columnist Brian Keating to tell us about some animals who like their privacy and are willing to live at the ends of the world to get it.
Antarctica is the coldest and windiest place on Earth. The world's lowest temperature was recorded here in 1983, minus 89.2 degrees Celsius. 98% of Antarctica is permanently ice-covered, and there are no land barriers to stop the relentless winds as they roar clockwise around the continent. It seems the most inhospitable place to raise a family, but millions of penguins would disagree.
When we think of the Antarctic, of course we think of penguins, but it's surprising when you look at the numbers. There's only 4 species of penguins that nest on the continent itself. Behind me is the Adelis penguin, and this is the first time I've seen this species, and we're here just at the right time. The chicks are fairly big. They're probably about a third of the size that they'll eventually grow, and the colony is alive with all kinds of behavior, chattering, and excitement.
For these family-minded penguins, a large part of Antarctica's appeal is the fact that it's so unappealing to other animals. They have no land predators here, which is lucky given their awkwardness out of water. But penguins do have to keep an eye on the skies. Skuas circle overhead like vultures, looking for unattended eggs or chicks. One study showed a 9% mortality rate due to predation by these birds. And the penguins aren't completely safe once they leave solid ground either. Leopard seals patrol the water near nesting sites, waiting for unsuspecting penguins to jump in. 3 of the 4 Antarctic penguins are from the same family, called brush-tailed. This group, which includes the Adelis, Gentoo, and chin-scrap penguins, winters in the ocean and then comes onto land only to breed. This takes place during the brief austral summer, which is opposite to ours. And their unique breeding strategy accounts for much of the animal's success.
It's amazing how highly specialized penguins are. They can go for a long time without feeding. In the spring, the male is the first to arrive to the rookery site. He'll waddle up the beach, select the perfect territory, and wait for the female to arrive. When she does arrive, he mates with her, she lays the eggs, and he sits on the eggs initially. Meanwhile, the female goes back to the ocean to replenish her own supplies. Finally, the female returns, and that gives the male an opportunity to get back to the ocean to look for some krill. The total amount of time that can elapse between start to finish for the male can be up to 5 weeks. He can lose 30% of his body weight during that period of time.
But it's the emperor penguin that must be called the king of Antarctica. This molting juvenile emperor was the only one I saw, sticking out like a sore thumb in this Gentoo colony. Our guide said he was about 200 kilometers from home. Unlike the other 3 species, emperors breed on the ice in the dead of winter. Emperor males also do the first egg-sitting duty, fasting for about 9 weeks until the female returns. And to survive the icy winds and brutal temperatures, the brooding fathers hunker down together to share body heat. Scientists theorize that this winter breeding strategy allows maturing chicks, like this one, to become independent when food is most plentiful, giving them the best chance for survival. Since brush-tailed penguins don't nest on ice, their options are much more limited. They rely mostly on pebbles, as well as some feathers and bones, to build their nests, and they need ice and snow-free areas to set up house.
Penguins don't have much to choose from for building a nest, so they use the stones that are in the vicinity. And some of the penguins go for quite a long ways. They put a lot of energy into walking away from the colony and finding the perfect pebble and bringing it back with their little arms outstretched to place it on the nest. Other penguins develop a pilfering behavior, and they actually steal stones from other penguins' nests.
Although they seem to compete for the same nesting spots, the same food, and the same pebbles to build their nests, brush-tailed penguins have actually adapted slightly different lifestyles. They have staggered breeding schedules, separated by several weeks, so the heavy feeding demands from newly hatched chicks are also staggered. And even though all the penguins rely on the same food source, the incredibly abundant Antarctic krill, they don't all fish in the same spot. Gentoos dive deep but stay close to shore. Chinstraps and adelies make shallower dives but travel further from their nesting sites. Adelies have been the dominant bird in the Antarctic for at least the last 600 years, nesting throughout the area. Today, there's an estimated 2.5 million breeding pairs of adelies here. But like the climate, the wildlife is shifting. These birds rely heavily on the winter ice pack, and as the ice pack decreases due to warming temperatures, these birds are retreating with it. But the lack of ice is attracting gentoo and chinstrap penguins to take their place, two species who prefer open, ice-free waters. Now, chinstraps are by far the most prolific penguin in the Antarctic, numbering about 15 million. Visiting the Antarctic in the austral summer and seeing huge colonies of penguins, fat from krill, feeding their growing chicks, it's hard to imagine the hardships they face during the rest of the year. These dapper-looking birds are well suited to show how evolutionary adaptations can make any place home.
When we come back, life and death in the underground. Nematodes are a major problem on farms. They can cause diseases in crops, and plants have few defenses against them. But here's something that turns the table on nematodes. Meet the oyster mushroom. It actually seeks out nematodes, then it eats them alive.
Dr. Greg Thorne, a fungus specialist at the University of Western Ontario, is an expert on roundworms, or nematodes, and their nemesis, the oyster mushroom. He joins us now. So, Dr. Thorne, how could mushrooms possibly kill these roundworms and nematodes?
To understand that, you really have to understand that the mushroom is a fruiting body, like an apple on an apple tree, and so the mushroom that's doing the killing is like the rest of the apple tree. It's the roots, if you will, the stem, the branches, and the leaves of the apple tree, which are hidden, growing in rotting wood. Right. And in that rotting wood are lots of little nematodes, and they encounter the filaments, or hyphae we call them, of the oyster mushroom.
And what happens when that encounter takes place?
Well, on these little filaments are tiny toxin droplets, which the mushroom produces, and these will poison the nematodes so that they stop moving. And once they stop moving, the mushroom essentially recognizes that they're lying there in their environment and grows towards their throats, down their throats while they're still alive, and then digests them.
Now, are they dead, or are they simply paralyzed by the toxin?
They're more or less paralyzed by the toxin. That's right, they're not really dead yet.
And how does the fungus actually then, it moves in and kills them?
That's right, we don't know the chemistry of it, but the mushroom must sense or be able to recognize the presence of the nematode lying in its environment and grows directionally towards the mouth of the nematode and down its throat.
So the mushroom doesn't swallow the nematode, it actually, in a sense, the nematode swallows the mushroom, although unwillingly.
That's right. When we first discovered that, we really thought that the nematodes might be sucking on the fungus, so to speak, you know, trying to go up to it like a lollipop, but in fact, it's the other way around. Like you say, the mushroom grows down the throat of the nematode.
That doesn't sound like a very pleasant experience for the nematode.
No, it's pretty unpleasant. When it first bumps into the toxin droplet, the toxin seems to disrupt its membranes and destroy its muscles, so you see its whole esophagus or throat regions swell and go out of proportion, and then it stops moving in general. It stops swimming, and the fungus starts growing these threads down towards the throat of the nematode, and the nematode, even though it's immobilized, is still alive and can recognize when one of these threads pokes into its throat, and sometimes feebly tries to escape, but there's no real escape. Once it's been poisoned, the fungus grows down the throat of the still living nematode and digests it from the inside out.
Now, do these nematodes make up a significant, I guess you can't call it a diet exactly for a fungus because they don't usually eat, but is this a significant source of protein and other materials for fungi, for mushrooms?
We don't really know, but the speculation is that these mushrooms, like the oyster mushroom, grow in a very carbon-rich and nitrogen-poor environment. Wood that they're eating is a lot like a diet of potatoes. And so if you were to compare it to the Irish during the Irish potato famine, the potatoes were their major part of their diet, and of course a real problem from not getting any meat along with your potato diet. So these nematodes essentially are little packets of meat for the oyster mushroom.
Now, surely the nematodes must have some way of combating or avoiding this untimely end.
The nematodes that I'm studying don't seem to have much in the way of defense, except sheer numbers. They reproduce tremendously, and so it's just not possible for the oyster mushroom to eat them all. But other nematodes may have thicker skins or smaller mouths and just not be so susceptible to the toxin.
Now, we've been talking here about oyster mushrooms, but is this ability to kill worms widespread among mushrooms?
Not really. It's actually a very specialized habit. Among the perhaps 1.5 million species of fungi in the world, we only know of about 300 species that specialize in eating nematodes.
So, Dr. Thorne, is this such a specialized mechanism that I suppose it might be tempting for people who grow crops that are, for which nematodes are a pest to think about adapting this? Is that even conceivable?
Well, there are really two approaches to getting rid of your nematodes using these nematode-trapping fungi, and one is probably unlikely, as you suggest. That is to simply plant the mushroom in the soil where your crop plants are growing. That's been tried in a number of instances, but it's been successful only a few times in very limited cases. The other is to learn more about the mechanism, the chemistry of how these mushrooms poison their nematodes in this case, and perhaps we can use that chemistry to help protect crops in the future.
Well, it's an intriguing peek into that microbial world. Thanks a lot for telling us about it, Dr. Thorne.
Oh, you're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Dr. Greg Thorne joined us from the University of Western Ontario. He was describing his research on fungi, mushrooms that kill nematodes.
When we come back, testing your powers of perception and your ability to avoid deception. Two archaeologists explain the origins of this artifact. You tell us which one's lying.
Dandruff, scratching, itching. Introducing new Neutrogena T-Gel Stubborn Itch Control with cooling menthol you feel on contact. Unlike self-control, it works. Ask any dermatologist.
Standard Life can help you now to realize your childhood dreams and more, and turn your investments into a roaring success. Standard Life. Profit from our knowledge.
We make your money work harder in your RRSP with premium rates on short and long-term RRSP GICs. A bank you can invest with. Come in and talk to us or call 1-800-465-CIBC.
This is how the story goes of Rhonda and her runny nose. Anytime a tissue neared, Rhonda's nose ran with fear. I want more than plain tissues, Little Nose pleaded. A magical touch was all it needed. Puff's soft tissue plus moisturizing lotion joined as one. Puffs Plus. What a notion. And Little Nose ran home happily. The moral, a nose in need deserves Puffs indeed.
You can now talk to anyone, anytime, from virtually anywhere in the world. Introducing Globalstar, the satellite telephone service that lets you go beyond cellular and speak from places all over the world. A single simple phone provides both satellite and cellular service with a clear, reliable connection. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
For more information, call Global Star at 1-866-G-STAR-66.
It's time for Fact or Fiction, the Monday museum quiz that pits deceit against knowledge. How do you play? We show you an ancient artifact and ask you to identify it. You get some help from two Royal Ontario Museum experts. Each of these experts will give you an explanation of the mystery object. Trouble is, one of them is lying, and your job is to separate the fact from the fiction. This small statue of a woman riding atop a stag was the object we showed last week, and here's what our specialists had to say.
I'm Peter Kellgren from the Department of Western Art and Culture at the Royal Ontario Museum, and I say that this piece is a hunting trophy, a deluxe ornamental piece made in Germany around 1600.
My name is Brian Musselwhite, and I work in the European section of the Department of Western Art and Culture at the Royal Ontario Museum, and I say this piece is a drinking vessel made in Germany about 1600.
So, what did you decide? Did you say the answer was A, a hunting trophy, or did you choose B, a drinking vessel? If your answer was B, a drinking vessel, you're right. Congratulations to Pamela Good of Chrysler, Ontario. She's this week's winner of Fact or Fiction. Now on to this week's object, something that I would identify as the base of a banister. Here with two more versions of what this could be are Dan Rahimi and Paul Denis from the Royal Ontario Museum. Listen closely to what they have to say about this artifact and see if you're able to tell who's being honest.
Dan, I was up in our Greek and Roman storage room a couple of hours ago, and I came across this really interesting object. What we're looking at is a Roman object. It's bronze. It dates to about the 2nd century AD. What we have is the finial. It's the top decorative element, as well as a very functional element for a horse-drawn cart. It's part of the suspension mechanism. It would have tapped the top of a pole on either side, near the axle on either side of the wheel, and then a thick piece of leather would have been held, and then the body of the cart would have been placed on the suspension, acting as like springs in a car. And as you can see, it's hollow cast inside, so the pole would have fit in there. And it's in the shape of a Roman altar, very typical of Roman 2nd century AD, topped with this knob. And then you can see the interesting finger here.
Well, Paul, I think that's an absolutely incredible story. And I think you should probably start by getting the object right side up. This object went like this. And I've seen many of these. And in fact, this is a British 18th or 19th century drinking vessel, not too different from some examples we know today. It's a metal body that would have held a glass for drinking ale. And the handle, which this very little cute finger, can you see the finger there? That's just a nice little touch, was part of the handle, and the base is now distorted because of the way it was found, but the base had been flat. And it was a very beautiful drinking vessel, made in the style of a Roman vessel. It was an archaizing kind of feature that the British did. And that's what it is. I liked your story, but I don't buy it for 1 minute.
But mine was the truth.
So, who's fibbing and who's telling the truth? If you think you can separate the fact from the fiction, you could win a prize. Is this object A, a British drinking vessel, or is it B, part of the suspension from a Roman cart? To play the game and to be eligible for the prize, you have to cast your vote. We'll return next week with the correct answer, as well as another mystery object. Here's how you can get in touch with us.
You wouldn't think that a busy marina was the best place for rare birds to set up a nest, but thanks to some accommodating neighbors, a wildlife disaster is turning into a conservation success. Here's our birding columnist, Tom Hintz, to tell us about it.
This noisy pair of red-necked grebes has every reason to sound off. They're at the center of a small story with a big message. Normally a wary water bird, The stronghold of this species' range is in quiet lakes and marshes in northern Canada, well away from humans. But these grebes decided to buck that trend.
At the turn of the last century, a few pairs of redneck grebes did still nest on Lakes Ontario and Erie, mostly at the mouths of small creeks and rivers. But with intensive shoreline development, increasing boat traffic, and human use, that all changed. These days, it would be hard to imagine a pair of grebes trying to nest in one of these intensively used areas. But that's exactly what they tried.
And they didn't choose some hidden remnant of natural wetland either. Instead, they plopped themselves down right in the middle of one of Ontario's largest and busiest marinas. To anyone who knows the wariness of this bird, it might seem a bit incredulous. In fact, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would not have believed it. For the last few summers, small numbers of grebes have been nesting smack dab in the middle of Bronte Harbor, on the shore of Lake Ontario, just 30 kilometers west of Toronto. This is one of the country's most developed stretches of waterfront. It hasn't been easy. The marina owners have struggled with making space for the assertive grebes, while still keeping paying customers happy. The grebes have even tried to nest on the back of some of these boats. Obviously, that isn't going to cut it, but there was some surprising middle ground. Birders and marina operators try to compromise, and the grebes bought in. When the grebes paired off and made it clear their intentions, a nest platform would be put out. In this case, an old floating tire. The grebes soon built nests on the tires by piling mats of aquatic vegetation into a nice little summer home. These stripy young grebes are a sign of the experiment's success. And the marina's waters seem to provide a good supply of fish for Dad to feed the baby grebes. For the marina owners, keeping the grebes has turned out to be a real balancing act. After one pair of grebes started a family, several others moved in. But putting out a whole pile of floating tires brought another problem: Canada geese. They like to nest on the tires too, but the aggressiveness of adult geese made them unsuitable residents in the marina. They don't tolerate anyone or thing near their nests. It took a little fine-tuning, but sparing and timely deployment of the platforms now pretty much results in only grebe nests. And despite the bigger size of the geese, once a pair of grebes has staked out their turf, they are not easily pushed out. Because they are next to so many people, the grebes have developed a large following. A lot of the folks stop by to check on their progress and share in their success. When Mom lays an egg or hatches a baby grebe, it's a big event. Exactly why the grebes chose this busy place is a bit of a mystery. Maybe the feeding is good, or perhaps there is protection from predators. But clearly, they were able to adapt to humans. But the bigger message here is about us, because we humans were also able to adapt to the grebes' needs. The marina owners didn't have to make this work, but they did, and it didn't take a lot of effort. Small changes can make a big difference. And that's a message that is important everywhere. Because if there is a will to help grebes or other wildlife, surely there is a way.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more relationship between polar bears and their mothers. One